In letter 14, this is a letter that's focused on humility. The patient, if you recall, in our last letter, had a reconversion, came back to the faith, breaking away from the worldly friends that he was hanging around. And this has humbled him. He's put a lot of confidence in his ability to be good. And having this experience of being around these people who were leading him away and him not being really aware of what was going on, when he woke up, when he came to this realization, he realized how vulnerable, in fact, morally and spiritually was. This is a humbling, which of course allows for a greater grace to work in him. Humility is an effective grace, but it's also something that allows God's grace to work more deeply in you, that you realize how radically dependent you are on God to help you out and to help you in your walk with Him. So Screwtape says this is the thing that we need to undermine. We need to destroy this guy's humility. Because of course this is one of the keys to growing in faith, is that you don't trust excessively in yourself. Probably we should talk about pride. We should talk about the opposite of humility to understand this virtue a little better. Well, nowadays when people talk about pride, they can mean all sorts of things that are not the traditional Christian sense of pride. So when you take pride in your school, when you take pride in your work, when you take pride in your family, Lewis will say that's a kind of warm-hearted admiration, a kind of loyal attachment or respect. That's not what the vice of pride is. Pride is where you have an excessive or inordinate attachment to yourself and to your own excellence. That something, your intellect, your good looks, your social standing becomes a kind of platform where you look down with contempt on others. That's pride in the sense of a sin. And in fact, not only is it the great sin, using Lewis's expression from Mere Christianity, it is the root of all sin. All sins, lust, greed, envy, all of these in some ways go back to pride. There's nothing wrong with wanting to be rich or smart or strong or funny, but what pride does is turn those pursuits into something essentially competitive. That to be richer, smarter, stronger, funnier, that you can always take what it is that you have and use it as a platform to look down with contempt on others. And as Lewis insightfully says, if you're always looking down, you can never look up. That's why, at its worst, it becomes a complete anti-God state of mind. And that is why it's such a rich source for all the other vices. It's the sin of the devil. Devils are not lustful or greedy. They're not chasing she-devils or embezzling demonic money, but they are proud. They have an excessive desire for their own excellence, and they would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven. So what is it that Screwtape recommends to undermine the patient's humility? Well, of course, one of the great tactics is make him proud of his humility. He notices that he's growing in humility, and now he can pat himself on the back for it. And let's say he notices this upsurge of pride. Hey, I'm taking pride in the fact that I'm humble. Now you can use that. Hey, I'm spiritually deep enough that I can notice that I'm taking pride in my humility. I'm not like those other people. I'm really humble, and so on and so on and so on. There's this great way in which you can always try to insert this self-reflection and self-complimenting, even at the very moment when you have this kind of self-revelation of your own inadequacy. One very common thing that people suffer with in trying to embrace the virtue of humility is addressed by Screwtape. That is, try to adopt a false opinion of your own talents and think that's humility. So try to get Michael Jordan to believe that he's just an okay basketball player. Try to get a Miss America to believe that, yeah, she's okay looking. Of course, you're trying to get them to believe things that they can't believe. And it becomes a kind of forced dishonesty. Humility isn't denying that you have the talents that God has given you. It's simply having the sense of the importance of those talents and not inflating them or making them more important than they are. Tempt him to vainglory or false modesty. Vainglory is something it's a word that's just dropped out of our contemporary vocabulary. But the idea of vainglory was that you take what it is that people should respect you for, and again, now you inflate it out of importance, that you revel in the gifts that you have, as if they're your own, and you're the cause of them. The thing that Lewis is helping us see through Screwtape's advice is that humility is self-forgetting. A man who could be just as happy with another having his talents and accomplishments as himself. That he happens to have them, but he could carry out what it is that he does, leave it behind, and not dwell on it as some kind of expression of his own excellence. Humility is the ability to enjoy the good, whether it's in you or whether it's in someone else. At bottom, what God is trying to do is kill our animal self-love, our desire to be pampered and petted and respected, and replace it with a love of God, that we love that goodness, that source of goodness, and all the other things that share in that goodness, regardless of whether we have it or not. Probably one of the most helpful pieces of advice that Screwtape gives that we can learn from, he remarks on how it is that the enemy doesn't really think that a man is called to think about his own worth at all, that his mind shouldn't be on himself. One of the space trilogy books, one of the science fiction books that Lewis wrote in the early 1940s, Paralandra, takes place on the planet Venus, and one of the characters in it is an unfallen woman. It's Eve, who has not eaten of the fruit, if you like. And one of the interesting things that she comments to a human being who's visiting Venus is that he always seems to be standing beside himself or standing alongside himself. That this way of always being outside yourself, looking at yourself, and that this is a condition of fallen human beings. Adam and Eve before the fall wouldn't have been regarding themselves and thinking about themselves the way we do. Well, this is one of the things that humility is meant to liberate us from, that we aren't standing alongside ourselves, always looking at how we compare to others and what we have that they don't. Well, in our next letter, we'll look at how it is that Screwtape advises Wormwood with regard to the patient's view about the war, and especially about how he regards the past, the present, and the future.